So now we're going to be moving into chapter 8, which is going to talk about rational expressions, graphing, multiplying, adding, subtracting, all that kind of good stuff. So in chapter 8, we're going to be talking about multiplying and dividing rational expressions. Now, what is a rational expression? Well, a rational expression is any ratio of two polynomial expressions. So for example, we have this one right here. And you'll notice that you can have variables in the top, the bottom, or both. Now, one of the most common things we can do with these rational expressions is actually simplifying them. Now, we've done this before using greatest common factor. And so an example of that would be like, we have 8/12 right here. And you'll notice that we can simplify by taking some value out of both of them. And you'll notice that you can take a 4 out of both. And so if I took 8 divided by 4, there would be 2 on top. And 12 divided by 4, 3 would be 3 on the bottom. And we get 2/3, right? Well, we can do the same when we have x values in the top and bottom, right? And so what we're going to do is we are going to find in here between these two quadrilaterals, what is a common factor? And we can simplify, right? So we're going to look at an example here. Now, example 1. We're going to simplify this expression. Now, what we're going to have to do is break down our polynomials that are not factored yet. So the first one, 5x, is already a factor. We don't have to do anything with that. But with the next part right here, we have to break it down into its two factors. And so we think about, okay, we used to use AC and B, right? The two numbers that multiplied, A would be 1, C would be 3. So multiplying would be 3, and our B would be 4. So the two numbers that multiply to 3 and add to 4 would be 3 and 1. And so we're going to rewrite this as x plus 3, because it's positive 3, and x plus 1, because it's positive 1, right? Now, let's do the bottom. Okay, so first we have x minus 6, right? Then I have x squared minus 9. Now, we got really good at those back when we were doing like third roots and all that kind of good stuff. And so we have difference of squares, that kind of stuff. So we have x plus 3 and x minus 3. And so you'll notice that there is a factor that's in both the top and bottom. And that would be the x plus 3, right? Now the rest is all fine, but I'd rewrite this as 5x times x plus 1 all over x minus 6 and x minus 3. All right? Now, part B asks an interesting question. It says, under what conditions is this expression undefined? And we learned a long time ago that undefined meant we have a 0 on the bottom. So we look at 1, 2, there are 3 times that we could get a 0 on the bottom. And so we're going to say x cannot be 6 because 6 minus 6 is 0. We don't want that. We're going to say negative 3 because negative 3 plus 3 is a 0, and we don't want that. And we're going to say 3 because 3 minus 3 is 0, and we don't want that. Now you might be asking the question, why do we look at this one and pick negative 3? Because we took that out of it. The reason that is when we start talking about graphing, we're going to talk about what that is. It has a special name. Even though it's taken out of the top and bottom, it still gives us a value of 0 on the bottom when we're graphing. And so we call that still undefined. So these are the 3 values that would make our bottom 0 and thus undefined. So x cannot be 6, it cannot be negative 3, or it cannot be 3. It can be anything in the real number set except for those 3 values. All right, here's a couple guided practice problems that you can try now. Example 2, it says, for what values of this expression will it be undefined? So remember, undefined means that we're looking at the bottom values right there to make the bottom 0. So I have to break that down. So first off, I have 4x, right? I have, and then I have x squared plus 6x plus 8. So we'll do a, c, and b. And that's kind of nice. We have it written up top already for us. A, c, and b. All right, so our AC for this one would be 1 and 8 would be 8, right? And our B would be 6. So the two numbers that multiply to 8 and add up to 6 would be, well, that would be 4 and 2, right? Because 4 plus 2 is 6, and 4 times 2 is 8. So I would write that as x plus 6, oh, excuse me, x plus 4 and x plus 2. So that means that I have 1, 2, 3 times that the bottom could be 0. So automatically I can know that x cannot be 0 because that would make that 0 and the bottom would be undefined. -4 because -4 plus 4 is 0 and we don't want that. And -2 because -2 plus 2 is 0 and we don't want that, right? And so we'd end up saying that C are the three values that we don't want on the bottom and thus making it undefined. Okay, here's a guided practice problem for you to try as well. All right, example 3. We're going to be simplifying again. All right, so what we have to do is we are going to have to break down our factors, right? And so the first one we have is 4w squared minus 3wy. And so I notice that I can take a w out of all of them, and I get 4w minus 3y. And then the next part would just be w plus y. That doesn't change at all. Now on the bottom, I have a 3y and a 4w. This looks very similar to this. The only difference is that their order is changed. So one of these crazy rules in math is if you factor out a -1, it actually can switch the order of our factors, right? Okay, and so that's what we're going to do. I'm actually going to change this into this. I factor out a -1 and it changes the order. And then on the end, 5y or 5w plus y does not change. I can't factor anything of that. So we see that we can actually take out this and this. And I'm left with w times w plus y on top all over -1 times 5w plus y. So this is our factored form. Now you might be wondering, okay, so is there a value of w or y that I can't have on the bottom? And the answer is we don't worry about that because they are arbitrary because we have two variables. So we don't have to worry about putting anything that it can't be for the bottom. So this is what we would do to simplify. Okay? Now, I'd like you to try these guided practice problems. Remember, you're going to be factoring out a -1 out, and that's okay, but I want you to have some good practice with it. All right, so now multiplying rational expressions. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to have to remember how to multiply fractions. And so remember, they use a and b, but I'll use an example. So 1/2 times 3/4. How do I multiply fractions? Well, what I do is I multiply the tops. 1 times 3 is 3 on top, and 2 times 4 is 8 on the bottom. I just multiply top by bottom. And we can also divide fractions. Remember, here's an example. If I have 2/3 divided by 3/4, right? That is the same as 2/3 times its reciprocal, which is 4/3. And so what I end up doing is I get 2 times 4 on top is 8. 3 times 3 is 9, is 8/9, right? And we can do this. We can do the same when we have rational expressions, and that's actually what we're going to be doing. Okay, so let's look at example 4 here. Okay, example 4, it says 4c over 5d times 15c d squared times 8a. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to, make a big line, and I'm going to take 6 times 15 on top, times, I have 2 c's, so c squared, and then I have d squared, right? And then on the bottom, I have 5 times 8, and then a and d. Okay, so Just checking real quickly. 6 times 15 is 90. So this would be 90 c squared d squared over, and then 5 times 8 would be 40 a d. Now, you might think we're done, but now we can simplify a little bit, and we can say, well, what number comes out of both 9 and 40? Well, 10 comes out of both of them, so I'm going to have a 9 on top and a 4 on bottom. Then I say, okay, do I have any c squareds in the bottom? I don't, so I have c squared on top. Okay, I notice that I have a d squared on top and a d on bottom, so I'm going to drop that power down by 1. I'm going to get rid of that d. And so now I just have a d on top, then I have a on bottom. So now I'm simplified. So this goes back to what we talked about back in the beginning of, I believe it was chapter 5, is when we were simplifying expressions like this, okay? All right, let's take a look at example B now. Example B is a division problem. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to rewrite it as a multiplication problem. So 18 x y to the third over 7a squared b squared times, and now we're going to multiply by the reciprocal. So it's going to be 35a squared over b and 12x squared y. Now, to make our lives a little bit simpler, we'll go back to that old rule of crossing from top to bottom. And we could say, all right, well, if I have an x here and I have 2 here, I can just cancel those out. I can also, I know that since I have 3 y's here, I can take 1 away and make that one go away. Also, I know that if I have 18 here and 12, they have a common factor of 2, so that would be a 9 and a 6. All right, and we can do the same with the other side. So 7 and 35 cancel out, and so this would be a 1 and that would be a 5. I have an a squared and an a squared that will cancel out, and I have a b squared and a b, so one of the b's will cancel out. And so what I end up having is 9 times 5, which would be what? 9 times 5 is 45. And then I have a y squared, and that's it, left on top. And on the bottom, now I have 1 times b, or 1 times 6 is 6, a b, and x, because I have an x left over here. And so now that's my final answer, 45 y squared over 6bx. And actually, thinking about it even further, you could take a 3 out of both of these. So this would actually be a 2, and this would be a 15. So actually, a real answer would be 15y squared over 2bx. So we can get it down even further and get it down all the way to this. All right, here is a whole bunch of guided practice problems you could try. I'll probably just have you try one of them now. All right, so now we've come to the final conclusion, the big guns here, okay? So, number 1, we're looking at polynomials in numerator and denominator. So this is what we're going to do to make our lives even simpler. Like we just did before, we can cross cancel out, right? So what we're going to do that is we're going to have to make sure that we have all of our factors. So I'm going to take the first one. I'm going to say x squared and negative 16. So our AC would be negative 16 and our B would be 6. So the two numbers that multiply to negative 16 and add up to 6 would be negative 8 and positive 2. So we're going to do x minus 8 and x plus 2 in my first one. Okay, and then on the bottom, x squared, 64. Okay, so the two numbers that multiply to 64 and add up to negative 16. Maybe you don't know this, and you're always more than welcome to just pause the video and try on your own how I get these, but it's x minus 8 and x minus 8, right? Now, in the other one, we're going to multiply, and we're going to have x minus 8 on the top. Okay, that's pretty easy. And then the bottom, AC is 6 and B is 5. So the two numbers that multiply to 6 and add up to 5 would be x plus 3 and x plus 2. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do the cross cancel because we're going to go across, right? So I have an x minus 8 and an x minus 8 that will cancel here. And I have an x plus 2 and an x plus 2 that will cancel here. And notice I have an x minus 8 and x minus 8 in top and bottom that will also cancel out. So all I'm left with from this whole big mess is 1 on top because all of these are gone, right? So I have a 1 on top. And all of these are gone, so all I have is x plus 3 on the bottom. So look, I went from a huge mess to just 1 over x plus 3. Okay? Now, let's take a look at letter B. Letter B is very simple, or similar. I shouldn't say simple, but it's similar. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by factoring out x squared minus 16. I know that that's x plus 4 and x minus 4. Again, a difference of squares. Over. And now I see 12y plus 36. Well, I can factor out a 12 out of that, and I get y plus 3. All right? Now it's a division problem, so I'm going to multiply by its reciprocals, right? So now I'm really looking at the bottom down here for the top. And I say the two numbers that multiply to negative 18 and add up to negative 3. Well, that's going to be x minus 6. Excuse me, these are y's now. Y minus 6 and then a y plus 3, which you'll notice is on the bottom, so that's a good thing. And then the next one, x squared minus 12x plus 32. So the two numbers that multiply to 32 and add up to negative 12. Anytime we multiply to a positive and added to a negative, it's two negative numbers. And so I'm guessing it's probably going to be 8 and 4. So the x minus 8 and an x minus 4. Okay, now we can do our cross cancel, make our lives easy. And I see that x minus 4 and x minus 4 cancel. And y plus 3 and y plus 3 cancel. And so what I'm left with is I have x plus 4. And then I have y minus 6 on top over 12 times x minus 8. So this is our final answer. Okay? Here's a couple guided practice problems I would like you to try. And that concludes our video. Good luck on your assignment tomorrow. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask.